One family, 17 employees, and the entire financial nervous system of Renaissance Europe running through their hands. That's not a metaphor. At its peak, early operations, the most powerful bank in the known world, the institution that collected taxes for the Pope, funded wars for kings, and quietly shaped the political map of a continent, ran out of a Florence office with 5 people in it. 5. This video is about the Medici Bank, and yes, you've probably heard the name, but what you haven't heard is how insane the actual mechanics were. Most people think the Medici were just rich Italian art patrons who happened to run a bank. That's like saying NASA is a government agency that happens to do some science. The reality is so much stranger and so much darker than the polished Renaissance story you were told. We're going to cover how they disguised interest as something the church couldn't touch, how a single banking decision triggered a murder inside a cathedral, and the slow motion collapse that happened because the family literally forgot how their own machine worked. Let's go. Here's something that almost nobody explains properly. The Catholic Church had a rule. Charging interest on a loan was not just frowned upon, it was a mortal sin. The Latin phrase was quid sorti accedit usura est. Whatever exceeds the principle is usury. Full stop. This created a spectacular problem for anyone who wanted to run a bank. How do you make money lending money if you cannot charge interest? The Medici's answer was a financial instrument called the Bill of Exchange, and it was arguably the cleverest piece of legal engineering in medieval history. Here's how it worked. Instead of lending you 100 florins and charging you back 110, the Medici would lend you the money today, but require repayment in a different city, in a different currency, at an exchange rate written into the contract. The return trip of that foreign currency back to Florence then converted at a slightly different rate. And that gap between the two rates, that's where the profit quietly lived. Theologians agreed it wasn't technically usury because the banker was supposedly taking on the risk of currency fluctuation. But then they took it further. They invented something called dry exchange. In a normal bill of exchange, money genuinely moved between cities through a real transaction. In dry exchange, the movement was entirely fictitious. No goods traded hands, no real transfer happened across borders. The whole thing was paper theatre, designed purely to produce an exchange rate gap that functioned exactly like interest. The medieval church banned usury and accidentally invented arbitrage. The Medici were the ones holding the pen. But here's the thing, the bill of exchange trick only works if you have something the church desperately needs. And the Medici had exactly that. The Vatican became their biggest customer. The Medici Bank was the official fiscal agent of the Holy See, essentially the Pope's personal collection agency across all of Europe. Every church tax, every fee, every tribute flowing from England or France or Germany toward Rome passed through Medici hands. And with that relationship came a weapon almost nobody talks about today. If a bishop was slow to pay his dues to Rome, the Medici could complain to papal authorities and have that cleric threatened with excommunication. The church's most terrifying spiritual punishment was, at various points in history, a debt collection tool wielded by bankers. In 1441, the threat of excommunication was specifically raised against the Bishop of Nevers for being too slow with his payments. The Medici weren't just a bank, they were embedded into the spiritual infrastructure of the most powerful institution on earth. They didn't need armies. They had something far more useful: control of the money flows the church needed to function, combined with the spiritual authority to punish anyone who resisted. That's important. But if you think that's where the power stopped, you haven't heard the alum story yet. In the 1460s, a man walking through the volcanic mountains west of Rome discovered one of the largest deposits of alum in European history. He wrote triumphantly to his godfather, Pope Pius II, that he had found 7 hills so stocked with alum as to be nigh sufficient for 7 worlds. This sounds like geological trivia. It was actually a geopolitical earthquake. Alum was not a luxury, it was an industrial chemical absolutely essential to the textile industry. It was the substance that made dye permanently bond to wool. Without alum, You couldn't dye fabric, and before this discovery, virtually all of Europe's alum came from the Ottoman Turks. The Medici, as the Pope's fiscal agents, secured exclusive rights to mine and distribute this papal alum across the entire continent. They became the gatekeepers of a critical raw material for the clothes that all of Europe wore. The Pope then banned the import of Turkish alum and framed it as a moral crusade. Buying Turkish alum, the Church declared, was akin to financing the enemies of Christianity. The threat of excommunication was deployed against anyone caught trading with the Turks for alum, and the Medici used that religious cover to jack up prices. At its peak, the papal alum operation was generating gross margins of up to 50% in markets like Bruges. Their rival banking family, the Pazzi, responded by smuggling Turkish alum into the Low Countries in open violation of the papal ban, specifically to undercut the Medici monopoly and steal their customers. The Pazzi were willing to commit an act the Church had framed as trading with the enemies of Christianity, simply to damage a competitor's market share. The religious language was a tool. Everyone in the business knew the real stakes were profit margin, not theology. And then the rivalry got lethal. Pope Sixtus IV wanted to buy the town of Imola, strategically valuable territory in central Italy, for his nephew. He expected the Medici Bank to fund it. Lorenzo de' Medici refused. His reasoning was political. A stronger papal territorial base would destabilize the balance of power Florence depended on. From the Pope's perspective, his own banker had just publicly blocked a papal family transaction. Sixtus responded by stripping the Medici of the papal banking account, the most prestigious and profitable relationship the bank had, and handing it to the Pazzi instead. The assassination plot followed directly from that banking decision. On April 26, 1478, two brothers were attacked inside Florence Cathedral during Mass at the precise moment of the elevation of the host, the holiest instant in Catholic liturgy. One of the lead attackers was a priest. The Archbishop of Florence was in on the plot. Sacred space was weaponized as a tactical opportunity. Giuliano de' Medici was killed. Lorenzo survived. A lone refusal in a Florence office set off a chain of events that ended with daggers drawn in one of the holiest buildings in Christendom. The Renaissance was, at its core, a financial world, and its violence was often denominated in gold. If you're finding this as wild as I am, hit subscribe. There's a lot more history like this coming, and you don't want to miss it. Drop a comment below with what surprised you most so far, because we're not even at the collapse yet. Now here's where the story turns into something almost Shakespearean. The Medici Bank had a structural genius at its core that most people never hear about. The bank organised all its branches as separate legal partnerships, each with its own manager, its own investors, its own liability, but all operating under a single central holding company in Florence. Financial historians consider this the first documented use of a holding company structure in history. If the London branch made catastrophically bad loans to an English king, the fallout could theoretically be quarantined. It wouldn't automatically drag Venice or Rome into insolvency. They also required branch managers to personally invest their own money into the branch partnership. If the branch did well, they did well. If it collapsed, they personally lost money, skin in the game. 6 centuries before anyone called it that. It was a brilliant system, and then the family stopped paying attention to it. Lorenzo de' Medici is remembered as the magnificent, patron of geniuses, philosopher prince, the face of Renaissance civilization. What is far less often stated plainly is that he was systematically looting his own family's bank. He treated it not as a commercial institution to be carefully stewarded, but as a personal fund for his political ambitions and cultural patronage. He became, by the end, one of the bank's largest debtors, and there was nobody to stop him. He even redirected his orphaned nephew's inheritance, funds that were not his to spend, to finance a war against the Pope. The young man had been raised in Lorenzo's household and trusted his uncle completely. Lorenzo exploited that trust without hesitation. The branch manager in Bruges, a man named Tommaso Portinari, was doing the same thing on a smaller scale. using the bank's money to buy his way into the social circles of the Burgundian court, extending unsecured loans to nobles who had no intention of repaying them, purchasing galleys that were lost to pirates. When his patron, Charles the Bold, died in battle and Burgundy dissolved into chaos, those loans became worthless. The Bruges branch collapsed, dragging the London branch down with it. The London branch had already been gutted by the Wars of the Roses. The Medici had lent money to English kings who were killed in battle or overthrown by new dynasties that simply refused to acknowledge the debt. By some estimates, 51,533 gold florins were owed to the London branch at the time of its collapse. Not a penny was recovered from the Tudor regime. There was no international court to compel a king to pay. There never was. The final blow came in 1494. When Lorenzo's son Piero surrendered humiliatingly to the French and was driven out of Florence, a mob inspired by the firebrand preacher Savonarola attacked the Palazzo Medici and burned it. The central branch of the bank, the one with 5 employees that had once held the financial arteries of Europe in its hands, was physically destroyed by a crowd told that Medici wealth was an affront to God. A Medici cardinal named Leo, the future Pope Leo X, tried to collect the 11,243 gold florins he had personally deposited in the Rome branch. He couldn't get them back. The family that built the bank was, at the moment of its destruction, one of its own creditors. Here's what makes the whole story so extraordinary. The Medici invented much of the architecture of modern finance: the holding company, the branch network, the letter of credit, linking manager compensation to branch performance. That these instruments outlasted the bank by centuries. Bills of exchange remained the foundation of international finance for 200 years after the Medici were gone. The bank didn't collapse because the instruments stopped working. It collapsed because the family stopped paying attention to the machine while spending its output. They confused owning the bank with understanding it. Giovanni de' Bicci built the system with discipline. Cosimo refined it with precision. Lorenzo inherited the reputation without fully understanding what built it. The first generation creates the machine, the second improves it, the third inherits the name and forgets how the gears work, and by the time that distinction mattered, it was already too late. If this kind of deep dive history is your thing, the real mechanics behind the events you thought you knew, there's a lot more where this came from. Watch the next video, leave a comment with your favourite detail from this one, and I'll see you there.